The drive took 12 minutes. After spending 8 months commuting 45 minutes each way to a distribution center in Baltimore, this felt almost too easy. I pulled into the employee lot of a wide, flat building just off Route 9 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 9 minutes early for my first day. The place wasn't winning any architecture awards. Concrete block construction, maybe 4 small windows across the entire front face, loading bays running the length of the south wall. But it was 6 miles from my apartment on Brightside Drive and paid $2 more per hour than anything else I'd applied to, which was the only math that mattered right now. I grabbed my lunch cooler from the back seat, locked up, and stood in the parking lot for a moment, just breathing the heavy August air. 4 months without steady work had a way of making even a concrete box look promising. When the call came through from this place, I said yes before the HR woman finished her sentence. The intercom buzzed me through into a small entrance area where a man stood waiting with his hand already extended. "Daniel Reeves?" he said. "That's me. But Dan's fine." Dan it is. He had one of those easy smiles that moved all the way up to his eyes. Salt and pepper hair, cut close on the sides. Maybe 50, give or take. "I'm Mike Callahan, floor manager. Good to have you with us." We spent the better part of an hour in his office. A cluttered but functional space with a whiteboard covered in shift schedules. Working through new hire paperwork while Mike walked me through the basics. Receiving procedures, inventory system, break rotations. He talked the way some people fish, patient, unhurried, not wasting casts. His coffee mug said, LSU alumni, and had a chip in the handle. "Ready to walk the floor?" he asked once I'd signed everything. The warehouse was larger than it looked from outside. Rows of steel racking climbed nearly 30 feet, and the concrete underfoot was painted with yellow directional lines that split at intersections like a road map. Somewhere deeper in, a forklift beeped steadily. Workers moved through the aisles with the practiced efficiency of people who'd stopped thinking about what they were doing. We run general merchandise. Appliances, furniture, seasonal, some pharmaceuticals in the north section, Mike said as we walked. Outbound is on the west end, inbound east. You'll be working the appliance section primarily. He gestured toward a block of aisles stacked with boxed washers and refrigerator units. The warehouse smelled like cardboard and something faintly chemical. Floor cleaner, maybe, or the preservative they use on pallet wood. Our footsteps echoed off the high ceiling. Mike kept up a running commentary through most of the tour, pointing out equipment stations and emergency exits. His demeanor was relaxed the whole time, the kind of manager who'd clearly done this orientation 100 times and genuinely didn't mind doing it again. But when we looped back toward his office, something shifted. Not dramatically. He didn't stop walking, but the smile settled off his face the way a light dims before it goes out. And by the time he opened his office door, he looked like a different version of himself. Older, maybe, or just less willing to pretend. "One more thing before you hit the floor," he said, pulling open his desk drawer. He set a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. Bold header at the top. Facility procedures. All staff required. "These aren't suggestions," Mike said. "Every person who works here signs off on them. I need you to read the whole list before we go any further." I picked it up expecting OSHA boilerplate, proper lifting, forklift right of way, hazardous material labeling. Instead, 1. If lighting fails for any reason, exit the building immediately using the nearest marked door. Do not use personal flashlights or phone lights. 2. No employee is to work alone in any section of the facility at any time. 3. If you hear sounds resembling voices, crying, or someone calling your name, including voices that sound familiar, do not respond and do not investigate. 4. All personnel must vacate the warehouse floor at 10:20 a.m. and 3:10 p.m. without exception. Return only after the all clear from a floor supervisor. 5. If you become disoriented, follow the yellow floor markings only. Do not improvise shortcuts through unmarked sections. 6. Do not enter the facility during a power outage, even if emergency lighting is active. 7. If you observe a coworker behaving unusually or concealing themselves, do not approach, acknowledge, or make eye contact. Continue working normally. A stone eye. There is a tall figure that sometimes appears in low-light sections of the building. Do not look directly at it. If you see it, turn and walk calmly in the opposite direction. 9. Do not remove any item from the warehouse floor that is not on your assigned pick list, including personal items left by others. 10. If you hear your name spoken inside the building after your shift ends, do not answer. Exit immediately. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Mike, giving him a full 3 seconds to let the punchline land. He didn't blink. "I know how it reads," he said, before I could figure out what to say. "Every rule on that list is there because something happened that made it necessary. Some of them are operational. Some of them are..." He paused, choosing his words like he'd chosen them before, and still wasn't satisfied with them. "Other." He leaned forward slightly. "I need your word that you'll follow all of them, not most of them. All of them." Rule 8 sat at the center of my attention like a nail sticking up from a floorboard. A tall figure, not a person, a figure. And not report it to a supervisor. Just don't look at it. Walk the other way. Part of me wanted to stand up, shake Mike's hand, thank him for his time, and drive back to my apartment on Brightside Drive. The smarter part of me thought about the disconnection notice from Entergy sitting on my kitchen counter, and the 4 months of unemployment stretching out behind me like a bad road. "Okay," I said. I folded the paper once and tucked it into my back pocket. "I'll follow them." Mike held my eyes for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then he nodded, and the smile came back. Not quite the same smile as before, but close enough. "Good. Let's get you started." The morning blurred past in a current of training videos and system walkthroughs. I'd nearly stopped thinking about the list by the time 10:20 rolled around, until I noticed the floor emptying. It wasn't like a regular break. Nobody finished what they were doing. A guy 2 aisles over just set his scanner down mid-count and walked. A woman operating a pallet jack left it where it sat and headed for the doors. Inside of 4 minutes, the warehouse floor was empty except for me and Mike, who appeared at my elbow like he'd been waiting. "Break time," he said simply. Everyone off the floor. I followed him to the break room. 12, maybe 15 people eating chips and staring at their phones. Completely normal, except for the way nobody sat near the door that opened back onto the warehouse. That side of the room stayed empty. At 10:35, Mike stood up. Back to work. My second week brought inventory rotation, and my first assignment was the East Wing, seasonal merchandise mostly. Halloween stock had started coming in, and the aisles were lined with boxes of plastic skulls and foam tombstones, and those motion-activated witches that cackle when you walk past. Jack had paired me with a woman named Sandra for the count, but Sandra called out sick that morning. Mike offered to pull someone else. "I'm fine on my own," I said. Mike looked at me over his clipboard. Didn't say anything for a beat. "Rule 2 applies during all working hours," he said, "not just after shift. I'll put Carlos in the next section. You need anything? Holler." The work was straightforward. Scan, verify, correct. Carlos worked one aisle over, and I could hear him moving boxes with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for years. The Halloween decorations stared out from their packaging with the fixed grins of things that don't know any better. About an hour in, Carlos went quiet. I noticed it the way you notice when a fan shuts off. Not immediately, but in the absence. The background sound of him was just gone. I kept scanning, but my attention had split. The lights dimmed. 3, maybe 4 seconds. Not a full outage. They never went dark, but enough of a drop that the shadows in the aisle lengthened and the corners disappeared. Rule 1. If lighting fails for any reason, exit immediately. I set my scanner on a shelf and turned toward the main aisle. The lights steadied. I stood still, listening. That's when I saw Sandra. She was crouched behind a stack of pallets across the main aisle, pressed close to the base. Her face had no color. She was looking straight at me, and the moment our eyes met, she pressed one finger to her lips and shook her head, once small and deliberate. Rule 7. Do not acknowledge. I looked away, picked up my scanner, found the next barcode on my list, and aimed the gun at it with hands that were not completely steady. Sandra had called in sick. Sandra was hiding behind a pallet 20 feet away from me, terrified of something I couldn't see. A few minutes later, Carlos's box shuffling sounds started up again from the next aisle, as though they'd never stopped. When I passed him on the way to the break room at 3:10, he said, "How's the count going over there?" "Almost done," I said. Neither of us mentioned the silence. Neither of us mentioned Sandra. I was starting to understand that this was also part of working here. After the 3:10 break, I was assigned restocking in the appliance section. Aisles 10 through 14. Straightforward work that gave my hands something to do, while my brain kept pulling at the image of Sandra's face behind those pallets. I pushed my cart into aisle 12 and checked my sheet for the next location. The cold hit me before I took another step. Not the regular climate-controlled cool of the building. Something different, sudden and specific, like stepping through an invisible wall into a walk-in freezer. The kind of cold that doesn't come from the air. The kind that makes the back of your neck know something before your eyes catch up. I stopped and looked up toward the far end of the aisle. My breath turned to vapor in front of my face. At the far end of aisle 12 stood a figure. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, not tall the way a big man is tall, but wrong tall, the kind of height that doesn't belong on anything that breathes. 7 feet, maybe closer to 8, and stretched thin, like something had taken a person and pulled them lengthwise until the proportions stopped making sense. It was completely still. No features I could make out. Just a dark shape, holding its shape against the fluorescent light behind it. But I knew it was looking at me. Not in the way you know someone is looking at you from across a room. In the way you know a fire is hot before you touch it. Rule 8. Do not look directly at the tall figure in the shadows. If seen, look away and walk calmly in the opposite direction. I dropped my eyes to the yellow floor line and turned around. Walked back the way I'd come. Steady pace. Not running. Running felt like it would be the wrong answer. Like it would change whatever calculation was being made at the end of that aisle. Cold sweat moved down my back despite the freezer air. My legs weren't fully cooperating. But I kept walking, and I did not look back. Not even when I heard something move across the concrete floor behind me. A long, slow drag of sound. Then nothing. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the main corridors, where the lights were brightest, and other workers were always in sight. Nobody mentioned a cold spot in aisle 12. I didn't bring it up either. Sandra was sitting alone at a corner table during the 3:10 break, working through an apple and scrolling her phone. She gave me a brief nod when I came in. Nothing more. I got coffee from the machine and sat by myself, trying to organize what I'd seen into something that made sense. It didn't organize. Mike came in a few minutes later. He filled his mug at the coffee station, then scanned the room the way a person does when they're looking for something specific. When his eyes landed on me, he walked over and sat down. "You saw something today?" Not a question. His voice was low, barely above the noise of the room. I hesitated, then nodded. "Aisle 12. How'd you know?" I asked. Mike turned his mug slowly in his hands. "Only certain people can see him. Most of my staff walk through that aisle every day and never notice a thing." He paused. "You're not most people, apparently." The cold I'd felt in the aisle came back to me, secondhand. "What is it?" "Not an it." Mike glanced at his watch. "That's a longer conversation. And we're almost out of break time." He stood up. "You're going on the modified rotation starting next week. I'll explain more then." "What modified rotation?" But he was already moving toward the door, coffee in hand. The rest of that shift passed without incident. Regular work. Regular people doing regular things. But I'd started noticing a subset of employees who moved through the building differently. A half-second longer pause before turning a corner. A slight widening of the route around certain sections. Small adjustments that looked like habit. Like accommodation. I'm becoming one of them, I thought. On the drive home, I checked my mirrors, more than necessary. The back seat was empty every time. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a coffee going cold beside me. The image of that figure at the end of aisle 12 had followed me through 2 nights of bad sleep, and I decided that doing nothing felt worse than knowing. I started with the building itself. Baton Rouge Warehouse, Route 9 history. Public records showed the structure went up in 1979, relatively recent for industrial property in that part of the parish. But it was the land underneath that stopped me. The warehouse sat on the former grounds of Pelican Pines Psychiatric Hospital, which had operated from 1921 until 1977. I found a digitized newspaper archive through the LSU library portal. The headline loaded slowly over my connection. tragedy at Pelican Pines. 34, dead in East Wing fire. October 1977. A fire broke out late on a Tuesday night. Most staff and ambulatory patients evacuated, but 34 patients in the locked residential ward, the East Wing, didn't make it out. By the time the fire department got inside, there was nothing left to save. Subsequent reporting raised questions. A 1978 investigative piece in the Baton Rouge Advocate referenced testimony from former staff about conditions in the lower levels of the hospital, experimental treatment protocols that had never been formally approved, patient records that went missing after the fire. State officials dismissed the claims. The remaining structure was demolished. The land sat vacant for nearly 2 years before a development company purchased it and broke ground on the warehouse. I changed my search. Baton Rouge Warehouse, Route 9 employee disappearances. 6 cases over 4 decades. Most were officially closed as voluntary departures. People who quit without notice moved on without saying goodbye. But in 3 of the cases, family members had pushed back hard. A woman named Celeste Martian had worked at the facility for 4 months before her car was found in the employee lot, with her keys still in the cup holder. A man named Anthony Broussard had told his wife he was hearing voices at work in the weeks before he stopped coming home. An older article from 1994 mentioned a security guard named James Thibodeau, who had gone back inside the building after his shift to retrieve a forgotten jacket. He was never seen again. I closed the laptop and sat in the gray morning light for a while. The East Wing, the locked ward, the voices. The warehouse's East Wing handled receiving. Monday came in overcast and damp, the kind of Louisiana morning that never quite warms up. I walked into the building with different eyes than I'd had on my first day. During lunch, I took my sandwich over to where Sandra was sitting alone. Dark circles, carving shadows under her eyes. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up, considered it, then gestured at the chair across from her. "Go ahead." I unwrapped my food slowly. Let a minute pass. "I did some research this weekend," I said, keeping my voice down. "About this building, about the land it's on." Sandra's fork stopped moving. "And about people who used to work here," I added. And stopped. She set the fork down very carefully, like she was buying time. Her eyes moved around the room. Quick, practiced. Then back to me. "Not here," she said quietly. "Loading dock. End of lunch." She was already at the dock when I got there, positioned away from the workers, drifting back in from break. "You need to stop asking questions," she said before I could speak. "I mean that in a helpful way, not a threatening way. It's just people who dig into this place tend to have a harder time here." "I've already seen the figure in aisle 12, I said. "I saw you hiding the other day. Whatever's happening here, I'm already in it." She crossed her arms and looked at the ground for a moment. "We don't all see the same things. What you see, what I see. It's different for everyone, but the rules work for all of it. The rules are about what's in this building," I said. "Whatever stayed here after the hospital." Sandra's jaw tightened. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. "People who break them don't stay," she said. "I've watched it happen." She paused. "Marcus, he was in receiving about 2 years before you got here. One night, staying late to finish a report, he heard someone say his name from the back of the storage section." She looked at me steadily. You know what rule that is? Rule 10? He went to check. She swallowed. They found his badge by the dock door the next morning. Nothing else. Official story was he quit without notice. A pause. His truck sat in the lot for 4 days. The drizzle had picked back up. Neither of us moved. Then there was Patricia, Sandra continued. She used the restroom during the 10:20 break instead of going to the break room. She stopped. What happened? Security checked when she didn't come back. Bathroom was empty. Her bag was on the sink. Sandra's voice had gone flat, the kind of flat that comes from having said something too many times to feel it anymore. Gone. I thought about Rule 4. All personnel must vacate the warehouse floor at 10:20 a.m. and 3:10 p.m. without exception. Why those times? I asked. I don't know, she said. I just know they matter. She checked her watch. We need to go back. She turned, then stopped. Dan. She used my name for the first time. Whatever you found this weekend. Whatever you're thinking about doing next. Her eyes were very direct. Don't. That afternoon, I was assigned to the North Wing. Specialty inventory, slow-moving items, the kind of section that gets checked quarterly at best. Dust had settled on most of the boxes like a second skin. I was working through the back corner when I noticed the wall. A section of it was wrong. The concrete was a shade lighter than the surrounding surface, and there was a seam, thin but continuous, running in a rectangle roughly the size of a door. I looked around. The nearest sounds were 2 aisles over. I pressed along the seam at different points. Nothing. Then I noticed a small metal plate near the floor, the size of an electrical panel cover. I pressed it. A soft click. A section of the wall swung inward an inch. I pulled it open. The room inside was roughly 10 by 12. No windows. Stale air that had been sitting undisturbed for a long time. A metal desk, filing cabinets, a single bare bulb on a pull chain. I stepped in and pulled the chain. The files in the cabinets went back to the early 1980s. Personnel records. Most were stamped in red. Terminated or resigned. A few had different notations. Transferred. And some, maybe a dozen, that said only missing. On the desk was a leather-bound journal. The inside cover read, R. Thibodeau, Security, 1984 to 1991. I recognized the last name. I opened to a random entry. April 3rd, 1986. Third incident in the east section this month. Management keeps calling it a ventilation problem. Nobody believes that anymore. Added to the personal list. Rule 17. Never stand still in any aisle for more than a few minutes. Movement seems to matter. August 14th, 1988. Wilson saw the woman in the mirror in the south restroom. Walked off the job the same afternoon. Can't say I blame him. Added Rule 22. No mirrors after dark. Any restroom. Any floor. December 9th, 1990. Storage section incident. 2 people. Official report will say what it always says. God help us. Rule 26. Section C, locked permanently. No exceptions, no matter what you hear from inside. The journal went on for 140 pages. R. Thibodeau had been keeping his own expanded rulebook for 7 years, well beyond the 10 printed on the sheet Mike had handed me on my first day. I kept reading. I pulled out my phone and took quick photos of several pages. The entries about the woman in the mirror, the storage room incident, the ones with body counts that never made the official record. I wanted to read every word, but I'd already been in here too long. Someone would notice I was gone. I placed the journal back exactly as I'd found it and killed the light. As I pulled the hidden door shut behind me, I heard footsteps coming around the far end of the aisle. I stepped to the nearest shelf and picked up my scanner. Mike came around the corner just as I finished adjusting a box. He stopped. His eyes moved from me to the wall behind me, then back. "Everything checking out back here?" His tone was easy. His expression wasn't. "Yeah, just cross-referencing some part numbers," I said, holding up the scanner. System flagged some discrepancies. Mike nodded slowly. "Interesting section to find discrepancies. I go where the list sends me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Curiosity's a good quality, Dan. Shows you're paying attention." He paused. "But in a facility like this, knowing when to leave something alone matters just as much." "Just doing my job," I said. He held my eyes for a long beat. "My door's always open if you have questions about your duties." He turned to go, then added over his shoulder, 3:10, break in 10 minutes. Don't lose track of time back here." I watched him walk away. He knew. He'd known the moment he turned that corner. But instead of anger, his face had carried something closer to expectation, like he'd been waiting for this moment for a while. I looked back at the wall. The seam was invisible now. I had photos of 30-plus rules on my phone, documentation of deaths that were never called deaths, and a manager who just delivered a warning wrapped in a friendly tone. And somewhere behind that concrete wall, R. Thibodeau's journal was sitting in the dark, waiting for whoever came next. The 3:10 alarm sounded. I headed for the break room, phone heavy in my pocket. Monday night, I went through the journal photos, entry by entry, at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me. Thibodeau hadn't just cataloged strange occurrences. He'd documented deaths. Employees who broke rules and didn't come home, filed away as voluntary departures, resignations, no-shows. The pattern was consistent across 7 years. Rule broken, employee gone, official story issued, file closed. One entry from August 1989 stopped me cold. The mandatory clearance times were established following the Callahan incident. The entities show increased activity during these windows. Something about the shift in building energy when the floor empties. All personnel must be off the floor before these periods begin, not during. Before. I read it twice. The Callahan incident. Mike's last name. I barely slept. Tuesday arrived gray and wet. I pulled in 15 minutes early, hoping to catch Sandra before the shift started. But as I came around toward the employee entrance, I saw Mike standing outside with someone I didn't recognize. The new hire was maybe 25, tall and loose-limbed, sandy hair, the relaxed posture of someone who still thought a job was just a job. "Dan, good timing." Mike waved me over. "This is Kyle Delaney, starting today in shipping." "Kyle, this is Dan Reeves." About 2 weeks in, so the layout's still fresh for him. Kyle shook my hand with an easy grin. "Good to meet you." And it's just Kyle. Nobody calls me Kyle, except when I'm in trouble. I shook his hand. I'd probably had the same smile on my first day. "I was hoping you could walk him through the floor after orientation," Mike said. "Cover the standard areas, especially emergency exits and break schedules." "Sure." Mike gave Kyle a brief, pointed look. Remember what we discussed in the office. Then he headed toward the administrative wing. The moment he was out of earshot, Kyle pulled the rules sheet from his pocket and held it up. Okay, so, is he always like that about this stuff? Or is this a first day thing? He's always like that about it. Kyle looked at the sheet. Do not look directly at the tall figure in the shadows. He glanced up at me, half smiling. Come on. Every warehouse has some version of this. At my last place, they had us convinced the freight elevator was haunted. New guy ritual. I stopped walking. It's not a ritual. Relax, man. He tucked the sheet back in his pocket. I've worked 4 of these places. They all do something like this. I'm not going to freak out and quit because of a haunted house list. People have disappeared here, I said. Not quit. Disappeared. Kyle's smile stayed in place. Cool. What's next on the tour? I tried 4 more times through the morning to make him understand. Every time, he deflected with a joke or a shrug. When I explained the mandatory clearance times, he looked at his watch and said, "So we all hide in the break room at the same time because the rules say so. Solid system." At 10:20, the alarm sounded and employees began wrapping up mid-task. Kyle watched with visible amusement. "They've really committed to the bit," he said. "I respect it." He followed us to the break room, at least. He spent the 15 minutes asking people if they'd seen any shadow figures lately. Most employees looked at their phones and said nothing. The room had the specific silence of people who'd learned not to engage. At lunch, I met Sandra at the loading dock. I pulled up the journal photos on my phone and walked her through what I'd found. She went through them slowly, scrolling with one finger. Her face lost color with each swipe. Thibodeau kept his own extended list, I said. At least 30 rules beyond the official 10. Mirrors after dark, certain storage rooms, how long to stay stationary during a night shift. "Where is this office?" she asked, handing the phone back. Her hand wasn't steady. "North wing, false wall, metal plate at floor level." I paused. Mike caught me coming out. "And didn't fire you?" He gave me a warning that didn't quite sound like a warning. Like he already knew I'd find it. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself despite the humid air. "I tried to quit twice," she said after a moment. "First time, my car wouldn't start for 3 days straight. Mechanic couldn't find anything wrong with it. Started fine the morning I decided to come back." She looked at the dock floor. "Second time, my aunt fell down her back steps the night before I was going to hand in my notice. Broke her wrist." She paused. I stopped trying after that. I thought about the journal entry. Employees attempting to leave experiencing unfortunate events until they returned. "What about Kyle?" she asked. "He thinks it's hazing." Sandra shook her head once. "They all think that at first." The afternoon moved slowly. I checked the shipping area twice. Kyle was working with Luis both times, relaxed and chatty, completely unbothered. At 2:50, I passed him restocking near the dock. 3:10 break, I said. "Break room. Don't be late." "Copy that." He gave a small salute. "Wouldn't want the shadow people clocking in without me." "This isn't a joke, Kyle." I know. He turned back to his work. "It's a safety procedure. I'll be there." At 3:05, employees started drifting toward the break room. The warehouse took on that particular pre-clearance tension. Not people wanting a break, but people wanting to be somewhere else, before the clock hit 3:10. I made it to the break room and looked around. Louise came in behind me. Sandra was already at her usual corner. Kyle wasn't there. "Where's Delaney?" I asked Louise. "He said he needed to finish labeling a pallet. I told him to wrap it up." Louise looked toward the door. "He said he would." I moved to the break room door. The small window looked out onto the warehouse floor. Kyle was in the middle aisle, clipboard in hand, moving between shelving units at a completely unhurried pace. He glanced at his watch, looked around at the empty floor, and smiled. The smile of someone proving a point to no one in particular. "That's the new guy?" Sandra appeared at my shoulder. "Yes." "Alone on the floor?" "Yes." I put my hand on the door handle. "Don't," Sandra said quietly. "Rule 2. He doesn't know." Dan. Every light on the warehouse floor went out simultaneously. One moment. Hundreds of fluorescent tubes, full industrial light. The next, complete darkness, wall to wall, as absolute as a closed room. The break room lights held. We stood in our lit box, looking out through the small window at nothing. Just black, where Kyle had been standing 30 seconds ago. A single alert tone sounded from somewhere in the building. One long note. Then silence. A single alert tone filled the building. One long note. Then silence. Rule 1. If lighting fails for any reason, exit the building immediately. But Kyle was out there, alone. Through the break room window, I could see the warehouse floor. Or rather, I could see nothing. Complete black. Then my eyes adjusted enough to catch movement. Darker shapes within the darkness, drifting between the shelving rows. Not one, several. Moving in that wrong way. The slide without walking that didn't belong to anything human. I counted at least 5 of them. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, limbs stretched past any proportion that made sense. No faces, just suggestions of faces. Darker hollows where features should have been. Kyle was visible in the dim glow that bled through from the break room. He was standing exactly where I'd last seen him. Clipboard pressed to his chest, head turning slowly as he tried to understand what he was looking at. "Hello?" His voice carried through the door. Uncertain. The confidence completely gone. Is this part of something? Because this isn't funny. The shapes kept circling, tightening. "Tom," his voice cracked. "Louise. Anybody." Sandra's hand closed around my arm. "Don't. Rule 6. Do not enter the facility during a power outage, even if emergency lighting is active." One of the figures extended an arm toward Kyle. It moved the way water moves when you pour it. No joint, no mechanics, just flow. Kyle swung his clipboard at it. "Get back." "What is?" His scream was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in an enclosed space. It hit the ceiling and came back down. The clipboard hit the concrete floor. Emergency lighting kicked in. Red bulbs, dim and scattered, turning everything the color of a dark room. In that red wash, I could see the figures closing around Kyle, overlapping, merging at the edges. His screaming stopped. I pushed through the break room door. "Dan," Sandra's voice behind me. "Kyle." I ran into the aisle. The emergency lights blinked. 3 seconds of total darkness. Then they came back. The figures were gone. Kyle was gone. His clipboard lay on the concrete floor. That was all. Mike called an all-hands meeting 30 minutes later. By then, the main lights were back. A maintenance crew had been in the electrical room almost immediately. which told me this wasn't the first time they'd responded to this particular situation. The conference room held the entire day shift, everyone standing because there weren't enough chairs, nobody looking at anyone else. Mike came in last. His face was the face of a man who had given this speech before. I'm sure you're all aware of the power interruption this afternoon. His voice was level and professional. I want to assure everyone that the electrical issue has been identified and corrected. There's no ongoing concern. No one spoke. Regarding Kyle Delaney, Mike continued, he's determined the position isn't the right fit and won't be returning. He looked across the room and found my eyes, held them. The message was not subtle. This is what the rules are for. We'll resume normal operations tomorrow. Your safety is our priority. That's the purpose of every guideline in this facility. He dismissed us. I waited until the room emptied. He didn't quit, I said. Mike straightened a stack of folders on the conference table. He didn't look up. Dan? I watched it happen. I was standing 6 feet away. What you observed, Mike said carefully, was a new employee who chose not to follow clearly communicated safety protocols. The outcome, while unfortunate, was a direct consequence of that choice. And now, we file a report saying he resigned. Mike set the folders down and looked at me. Something in his face shifted. Not softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. What would you have me do? Call the police? Tell them what? That entities we can't name or explain took a 25-year-old shipping clerk because he stayed on the floor during a mandatory clearance window? He paused. These things have been here for decades. The rules exist because someone before me figured out that rules were the only thing that worked. You follow them, you go home. You don't. He didn't finish. Go home, Dan. Tomorrow will be a regular day. I took the long way out, past the aisle where Kyle had been standing. The clipboard had been removed, but in the harsh fluorescent light, I saw something the cleanup had missed. 3 dark drops on the concrete floor. I crouched down. Blood. When I stood up, Mike was at the end of the aisle, watching me. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We both already knew. I called in sick the next morning. Mike accepted it without comment, though something in his tone said he knew exactly what I was doing. I spent the day going back through the Thibodeau journal photos. Every entry, every margin note, every rule number. One name appeared repeatedly in the later entries. Carol Simmons. According to the journal, she'd been a logistics coordinator from 1988 to 1990. Described in one entry as the only person in this building who understands what we're actually dealing with. More importantly, she had left. Voluntarily, successfully, without anything following her out. One of the few who got away clean, Thibodeau had written. If she was still alive, I needed to find her. It took most of the day. Cross-referencing the journal details with the public records and social media eventually gave me an address. A Carol Simmons of the right age, living in Metairie, about 25 minutes from the warehouse. Property records showed she'd bought the house in 1991, the year after leaving the job. I decided not to call ahead. This wasn't a phone conversation. I drove out after dinner. Her house was on a quiet street, small and well-maintained, with trimmed hedges and a row of potted ferns along the porch rail. I sat in the car for several minutes, working out what to say. "Hi, I found your name in a dead security guard's journal. Can you tell me about the supernatural entities at my workplace?" I walked up and rang the bell. A long pause, then footsteps. The door opened a few inches on a security chain, and a woman with gray streaked hair looked out at me. "Yes? Miss Simmons? Carol Simmons? Who's asking?" Not a question. "My name is Dan Reeves. I work at the warehouse off Route 9. I found your name in Raymond Thibodeau's journal." The color left her face so completely, it was like watching a light switch off. For a moment, I thought she was going to close the door. Instead, she said, "You've read it. Parts of it." She studied me through the gap for a long moment. "What section?" "Appliances, mostly. Some East Wing." "Have you seen them?" "Yes. Tall figures." I paused. "And I was there 2 days ago when they took someone." She closed the door. I heard the chain slide. The door reopened fully. "There's a diner on Veterans Boulevard, 4 blocks east. Meet me there in 20 minutes." She closed the door again before I could respond. The diner was nearly empty. I took a corner booth away from the windows. Carol arrived exactly on time, scanned the room before she sat down, and ordered coffee without looking at the menu. "I never expected to hear that name again," she said. "Thibodeau. Did you know him well?" "He was the only one who didn't think I was losing my mind." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Everyone else found ways to explain it away. Gas leaks, stress, overactive imagination. A pause. "Even after Marcus disappeared?" I sat forward. Sandra mentioned a Marcus. "There have probably been several Marcuses over the years," Carol said, with a smile that had nothing happy in it. "That place has a pattern." She took a sip of coffee. "Why are you here, Dan? What do you want from me?" "I want to understand what's in that building. What took Kyle Delaney 2 days ago? Why there are rules about tall figures and voices and mirrors after dark." She set the mug down precisely. "If I tell you what I know, I need something from you first." "Okay." "You quit. Not 2 weeks' notice. Not after you finish your current project. You leave and you don't go back. I've been unemployed for months. I can't just..." "You can." Her voice was flat and certain. "You will, or this conversation ends right now, and you figure it out the same way the rest of us did." She looked at me steadily. "Do we have an agreement?" I thought about Kyle's face in the red emergency lighting, the way the shapes had closed around him. "Yes," I said. Carol nodded once. "The warehouse wasn't always a warehouse. You know that much." She turned her mug slowly. "It sits on the former grounds of Pelican Pines Psychiatric Hospital. Operated from 1921 to 1977. Officially, it was a standard facility. Long-term psychiatric care, some outpatient services." She paused. "The basement levels were something else. The experimental treatments. You found more than I thought." She glanced at me. "The administration called it enhanced therapeutic intervention. The staff who worked down there called it the program. Patients who didn't respond to conventional treatment were transferred to the lower ward. Sensory deprivation first, then hypnotic regression, then electromagnetic stimulation, experimental pharmaceuticals, induced dissociative states." She stopped. "They believed they could access regions of human consciousness that conventional psychiatry couldn't reach. That's torture. That's what it was. and it changed the patients, not in the ways the doctors intended. She lowered her voice. Have you ever heard the term tulpa? No. A thought form, an entity generated by concentrated mental energy. Some traditions believe that sustained, focused thought can produce something real, something that exists independently of the mind that created it. She watched my face. The experiments broke open something in those patients, created conditions for things to come through, or created the things themselves. Nobody who survived long enough to study it ever agreed on which. The tall figures. Carol nodded. Former patients. Their bodies are gone, but whatever the experiments turned them into, that persists, attached to the location, attached to the ground the hospital stood on. And the voices, the crying, the 34 who died in the East Wing fire, October 1977. Most of them were program patients. She looked at her coffee. The fire started in your section of the building. I sat with that for a moment. When they built the warehouse, I said, they just poured concrete over the ruins. They cleared the above-ground structure, but the basement levels were sealed and built over. The foundation is still there. Whatever happened in those rooms is still there. She leaned forward slightly. The entities didn't leave. They adapted. The warehouse gave them a new geography to occupy, new boundaries, new rules. The rules were worked out over years by people like Thibodeau, trial and error, mostly error. Her voice was quiet now. The clearance windows, 10:20 and 3:10. Those times correspond to when activity peaks. Something about the shift cycle, the building's energy patterns. Nobody fully understands the mechanism, but the correlation is consistent enough that ignoring it gets people killed. Mike knows all of this. Whoever manages that facility always knows. It gets passed down. The rules, the history, the protocol for when someone doesn't follow the rules. She looked at me directly. The official stories about people quitting, those are part of the protocol too. I thought about Mike's face in the conference room. What would you have me do? Why do some people see the figures and others don't? Carol was quiet for a moment. Thibodeau had a theory. He believed that the entities can only be perceived by people with a certain receptivity, some neurological or psychological openness that most people don't have. She paused. He called it being tuned in. The entities know who can see them, and they pay more attention to those people. The cold in aisle 12, the way I'd known it, was looking at me. Can I ask you something? I said. You can ask. How did you leave? Thibodeau's journal said you were one of the few who got out. Sandra told me she tried twice, and something stopped her both times. Carol was quiet for a long moment. She turned her coffee mug in a slow circle. I made a deal, she said finally. I waited. Not with management, not with Mike or whoever was managing the place then. She met my eyes. With whatever is in charge of that building. The diner hummed around us. Someone at the counter laughed at something on their phone. What kind of deal? I asked. Carol looked at me for a moment longer. Then she reached into her purse and set something on the table between us. A small piece of paper, folded twice, aged yellow at the edges. Read that when you're alone, she said. Not in the parking lot. Not in your car outside. When you're home, with the doors locked. She stood up and put on her coat. And Dan, she looked down at me. You promised. She left a 10 on the table for the coffee and walked out without looking back. I sat alone in the corner booth for a while, the folded paper in front of me, the diner noise going on around me like nothing had happened. Then I put it in my pocket and drove home. The entities didn't leave, Carol said. They were bound to that site, to the memory of what was done to them there. The waitress came by with the coffee pot. We both went quiet until she moved on. When the construction crews started reporting incidents during the build, Carol continued, the development company brought in consultants, different kinds, some with academic backgrounds, some with other kinds of expertise. The conclusion was that relocation wasn't possible. The only viable option was containment. The rules aren't safety guidelines. Her voice dropped further. They're containment protocols. Every single one exists because someone died before it was written. She turned her mug. The clearance windows, 10:20 and 3:10, those times correspond to peak activity periods. Something about those intervals makes the boundaries thinner. Everyone clears the floor because that's when it's most dangerous to be on it. I thought about the way Mike had corrected himself in the break room on my first day. Not an it, a he. Mike, I said, what's his role in all of this? Carol's expression shifted. He's a keeper. There's always one stationed at the site. They maintain the containment, rituals, boundary reinforcement, protocols developed over decades. She paused. The keeper before Mike was a woman named Ruth Fontenot. She trained him, and before her died, she passed the role to him. Keepers don't retire? They don't retire. Carol's voice was flat. The role has a cost. Eventually, they need a successor, or the containment degrades, and the entities notice degradation. I thought about what Mike had said. Only certain people can see him. The way he'd watched my face when he said it. Carol reached across the table and put her hand over my wrist. That's why you have to leave. Now, before Mike decides what you are, what I am, a potential successor. Her grip tightened. I was one too. That's why I had to get out before Ruth could formalize the choice. I made myself stop engaging with what I was seeing, stopped acknowledging it. Eventually, the connection, whatever it is, weakened enough that I could walk away. She released my wrist. It took 2 years, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. You're saying Mike might be trying to make me the next keeper? Not might. She held my eyes. If he hasn't already started, he's about to. The entities are always testing the boundaries. If they got out, she stopped. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but based on what I witnessed during containment failures, it wouldn't stay in the building. These things can affect perception, cause physical harm, manipulate behavior. Imagine that with no walls around it. I sat with everything she'd told me. Experimental treatments, minds broken open, something coming through that couldn't be put back. Remember your promise, Carol said as we prepared to leave. Quit tomorrow, walk out, and don't look back. I will. She nodded once, left cash on the table, and walked out. I sat in the booth for another few minutes, the folded paper in my jacket pocket, the diner noise continuing around me as though none of this was real. I drove home with Carol's warnings playing on a loop. The way Mike had caught me leaving the hidden office and looked almost relieved. The way he'd watched me after Kyle disappeared. The way he'd said, only certain people like it meant something specific. I barely slept. The next morning, I arrived at the warehouse with my resignation typed out on my phone. I was going to say it to Mike's face, hand back my keycard, and leave. Mike wasn't in his office. The front desk told me he'd come in early, but nobody had seen him in over an hour. I went through the motions of my morning tasks, watching the clock, waiting for him to surface. The warehouse felt different now that I understood what it was. Not a building that stored things, but a building that contained things. A cage with fluorescent lighting and yellow floor lines and mandatory break schedules written in blood. At 10:05, I went to the loading dock to check on an inbound shipment. The bay door was down. No other workers around. As I turned to leave, I noticed the wall beside the dock controls. A vertical seam, floor to ceiling. Hairline thin, but continuous. I ran my hand along it and felt a faint current of air. I found the release the same way I'd found the hidden office, working along the base of the wall until something gave. A recessed latch that looked like a crack in the concrete. When I pulled it, a section of wall swung inward on a counterweighted hinge. Behind it, a staircase going down. Bare concrete walls, single bulbs in wire cages, dim and spaced far apart. I knew I should close it. I'd promised Carol I would quit, not go deeper. I went down anyway. The basement was larger than I expected. High ceiling supported by thick concrete columns, smooth cement floor carved with concentric circles that covered most of the surface. At the center stood Mike. His posture was different from anything I'd seen from him before. Spine straight, arms extended slightly at his sides, head tilted back. A ring of candles surrounded him, maybe 40 of them, casting unsteady light that made the carved patterns on the floor seem to shift. He was speaking in something that wasn't English, a rhythmic cadence that rose and fell in a way that felt like it was pressing against the inside of my skull. The air had the quality of air before a lightning strike. The carved lines in the floor held a faint luminescence that pulsed with the rhythm of Mike's voice. Along the walls, shadows moved independent of any light source, stretching and contracting, reaching toward the center of the room and pulling back. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and couldn't move. Mike stopped speaking. He turned and looked directly at me. His face wasn't angry. It was something I hadn't expected from him. Relief. "Dan," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been at this for hours. "I was just about to come find you. I came to quit," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You found this door because something brought you to it." He stepped carefully out of the innermost circle, precise about not disturbing the candle positions. The wall shadows stretched toward him as he moved, then receded. The building knows who's inside it. It tests them. It shows itself to the people who can potentially maintain it. I talked to Carol Simmons last night. Mike stopped. Something moved through his expression. She couldn't have told you everything. She left before her training was complete. She told me enough. I took a step back toward the stairs. I'm not interested in what you're offering. I'm not offering anything. His voice was quiet and tired. I'm telling you what's true. The containment is degrading. I can't sustain it alone much longer. He gestured at the space behind him. The candles, the circles, the shadows moving restlessly along the walls. this used to be sufficient. It's not anymore. They're stronger than they were. More aware. Find someone else. There isn't anyone else. Not here. Not now. He looked at me with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Why do you think I hired you, Dan? Your resume was average. Your interview was average. But I sensed something in you the moment you walked in. The same thing Ruth Fontenot sensed in me. I thought about my first day. The way he'd watched my face when he handed me the rules. The way he'd looked almost satisfied when I told him I'd seen the figure in aisle 12. You knew from the beginning. I suspected. Then aisle 12 confirmed it. One of the shadows along the wall extended toward the center of the room, a long, thin arm shape reaching across the floor. Mike said something short and quiet, and it withdrew. What happens if it fails completely? I asked. The entities aren't malicious in the way we understand malice. They don't have human motivations, but their presence is destabilizing. Reality behaves differently around them. Perception, time, physical, matter. If they move beyond this building without containment. He stopped. I've seen partial failures, small breaches. What happened to Kyle was a partial failure. He looked at me. A complete failure would not stay in this building. Why not demolish it? Build somewhere else? That was attempted before construction began. Religious intervention, academic researchers, a government assessment in 1979 that was never made public. Nothing displaced them. The site itself is the anchor. Destroying the structure releases them without the protocols we've spent 40 years developing. He held out his hand. I'm not asking you to decide today. Stay. Let me show you what I know. Understand what's at stake before you make your choice. Along the walls, the shadows had taken on shapes. Tall, stretched, almost recognizable. They held for a moment and then dissolved back into darkness. I looked at Mike's outstretched hand. I need time, I said. Not too much. He lowered his hand. The 10:20 window is in 15 minutes. You should be upstairs before it starts. He turned back toward the candles. And Dan, don't tell the others what you've seen down here. 2 nights later, I pulled into the parking lot for my evening shift and knew immediately that something was wrong. The building was dark. Every window. The exterior lighting was out, except for the dim parking lot poles, and the lot itself was empty. No evening shift vehicles, no delivery trucks at the bays. I checked my phone. 8:14 p.m. The evening shift should have been well underway. Mike stepped out of the shadows near the entrance as I got out of my car. He looked like he hadn't slept. His skin had a grayish quality under the parking lot lights, and he was holding himself with a rigid tension I'd never seen from him. It's happening, he said. No greeting. What is? The containment. It's moving faster than I calculated. He held up a key card. We need to go inside. I looked at the dark building. Rule 1. If lighting fails for any reason, exit immediately. The power's out. This isn't an electrical failure. He swiped the card. The reader beeped, and the door clicked open, despite the dead building around it. They're testing the outer boundaries. I need you inside. Now. Every part of me that had survived this long at the warehouse was telling me to get back in my car. I followed Mike through the door. The temperature dropped the moment it closed behind us. 20 degrees, at least. immediate and total. My breath clouded. Mike switched on a flashlight, which I knew broke a rule, but the rules felt different when the person who enforced them was the one breaking them. "The evening shift," I said. "I sent them home at 6, told them it was an electrical issue." He moved toward the warehouse floor entrance. They were safe. That's what matters. The main floor was wrong in a way that was hard to articulate. The flashlight beam caught the shelving rows and the yellow floor lines, and everything looked the way it always looked, except that shadows were moving on surfaces and nothing was casting them. A shape slid across the far wall and went through a support column without stopping. Another moved across the floor in the opposite direction from the light. "They're becoming less contained," Mike said, "more independent. The boundaries are holding, but they're not holding the way they were." What changed? He turned the flashlight toward aisle 12. It's been building for a long time, but there was a surge tonight. He looked at me. "I think they sense a transition, a new keeper coming into awareness." The shadows moved around us, reaching and retreating, shapes forming in the dark between the shelving rows. Something very tall stood at the far end of aisle 12 and was absolutely still. I didn't look directly at it. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Mike reached into his coat and handed me something. A piece of paper, folded once, with symbols I didn't recognize written along the margins. "Read it," he said, out loud, exactly as written. "Don't stop, regardless of what you see." I looked at the paper, then at the darkness at the end of aisle 12. "And if I read it," I said, "what does that make me?" Mike was quiet for a moment. "It makes you a keeper," he said. The shadows pressed closer. The temperature dropped another degree. Somewhere in the building, in a section I couldn't see, something made a sound, like a voice almost forming a word. I looked at the paper in my hands. We moved through the warehouse floor, with Mike's flashlight cutting a narrow path between the shelving rows. I could feel the cold intensifying in certain sections, not the general cold of before, but specific pockets of it, localized, like stepping past something that was drawing heat out of the air. Near the east wing, my ears popped the way they do in an elevator, a sudden pressure change that shouldn't have been possible in a single-story building. The whispering followed us at a distance. Not words. Almost words. Mike led me back to the loading dock hidden door. It opened at his touch before he'd even found the latch. The stairs going down looked different than they had before. Longer, somehow. The bulbs in their wire cages dimmer and more widely spaced. "The space adapts," Mike said, starting down. "It's not the same every time." The basement had changed. The single circle I'd seen before had expanded into 3 concentric rings that covered most of the floor. Candles burned at intervals along each one, their flames standing perfectly still in air that shouldn't have been still. Between the rings, symbols had been painted on the concrete in a dark reddish color. On a stand at the center of the innermost circle sat a book, large, leather-bound, older than anything else in the building. "The Keeper's Record," Mike said. "History of the site, nature of the entities, the ritual maintenance for each containment point." He turned to face me. The candlelight made his eyes look hollow. "There's a final rule I haven't given you, the one that supersedes all the others. I waited. When containment degrades beyond a certain threshold, a new keeper must accept the connection, voluntarily, or the entities move beyond the building. The shadows along the walls reacted to his words, a surge of movement, shapes pressing toward the circles before pulling back. I thought you were already training me, I said. Training is preparation. The actual transfer requires a specific window, when the barriers are thin enough for the connection to form, but not so thin that everything comes through at once. He looked at the candles. That window is now. I thought of Carol's hand on my wrist. You promised. What does it mean, exactly? Becoming a keeper. Mike placed his hand on the book. You become linked to this place, to what's contained inside it. After the ritual, you can't be away from the warehouse for more than 12 hours. Beyond that threshold, it starts with pain. The longer you stay away, the worse it gets. And the containment begins to deteriorate in direct proportion to your absence. 12 hours, I said. That's not a job. That's a sentence. Yes, Mike said quietly. That's exactly what it is. A voluntary one, to prevent something involuntary happening to a lot of people who have no idea this building exists. The whispering around us rose slightly, almost urgent. And if I say no? Mike looked at the moving shadows. I've read the incident reports from other sites where the keeper role went unfilled. He turned a page in the record. Pineville, Louisiana, 1994. A cluster of unexplained illnesses that lasted 8 months, later attributed to contaminated groundwater. But the initial event was a containment failure at a site like this one. Smaller, fewer entities. 63 people hospitalized. 11 never fully recovered cognitively. He turned another page. Gary, Indiana, 2001. An abandoned psychiatric facility. 3 entities. Keeper died without a successor. The entities dispersed into a 12-block radius. Official record called it mass hysteria, possible environmental toxin. 39 deaths in 5 days. 17 more serious violent incidents from individuals with no prior history. He looked up at me. The Pelican Pines entities are more numerous and more developed than either of those sites. They've been here longer. They've been growing in the dark. He paused. A complete failure here wouldn't stay in Baton Rouge. I looked at the tall figure standing at the edge of the ritual space. It hadn't moved since we came down. It was watching me with the dark hollows where its face should have been. Why me? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Because you see them clearly. Because you came back after Kyle. Because they've been observing you since your first day. And the tall one in particular has shown consistent interest in you. Mike stepped closer. And because the connection needs to be accepted willingly. The ritual doesn't function otherwise. It has to be your choice. I closed my eyes for a moment. Carol had gotten out. She'd made herself stop acknowledging what she saw, let the connection weaken, and walked away. That path existed, but that was before I'd been in this basement, before I'd read Thibodeau's journal, before Kyle had screamed in the emergency lighting and then stopped, before Mike had read me the incident reports from Gary, Indiana. How long would I be tied here? Until you find a successor. It could be years, decades. His shoulders dropped slightly. Ruth Fontenot held the position for 11 years before she found me. I've been keeper for 15. He paused. And when you transfer it, you'll be free. Completely. The connection dissolves. What happens to you when I accept? Something moved across his face. Not relief, exactly, but the loosening of something that had been held very tight for a long time. The connection releases from me. I'll be able to leave. He said it simply. But I heard what was underneath it. I'll be able to leave. 15 years of 12-hour radius. 15 years of feeling every entity in every aisle, every shift of the boundaries, every test against the walls. Step into the innermost circle, he said. Place your hands on the book. I'll perform the transfer. I stood at the edge of the outermost ring. This was the last moment where the decision was still mine. I thought about Carol, about the normal life I'd been trying to claw back before I ever walked into this building, about my apartment on Brightside Drive that I'd barely spent any time in. I thought about the East Wing, about 34 people who had burned in a locked ward in 1977 and were still here, still present in some form that shouldn't be possible because of what had been done to them in the basement levels of a building that no longer existed. I stepped over the first line. The candle flames bent away from me, all of them simultaneously, as if something had exhaled. I crossed the second line. The whispering stopped completely. The shadows along the walls went absolutely still. Every entity in the building. I couldn't explain how I knew this, but I knew it, had turned its attention to this room. The tall figure at the edge of the space moved one step closer, watching. I stood at the edge of the innermost circle. Mike began speaking. The same language as before, the cadence that pressed against the inside of the skull. The candles flared upward, throwing more light that somehow produced less warmth. The symbols painted between the rings seemed to shift and rearrange. I stepped into the circle and put my hands on the open book. The pages were warm under my palms, then hot. The text, symbols I couldn't read, appeared to move, crawling toward my wrists, disappearing beneath the skin. I watched this happen with the strange calm of someone who has already made their decision and is simply watching it execute. The pain started gradually, a pressure in the chest that expanded outward through my arms and back, growing until it occupied everything. I gritted my teeth and kept my hands on the book. Mike's voice rose. The final words hit the basement like a physical force. The candles surged. The shadows threw themselves against the boundaries of the circles and couldn't cross. The tall figure stood completely still. Then everything stopped. Perfect silence. Absolute stillness. Every candle flame frozen mid-movement. And then it came in, like water, rushing into a space that had been holding its shape under pressure. Awareness, total and sudden. I could feel the warehouse above me, every aisle, every shelf, every corner and hidden space. I knew the dimensions of it, the way you know the dimensions of your own body. More than that, I could feel them, each one distinct. The tall figure from aisle 12. Its presence had a particular quality, a cold curiosity that had been focused on me for weeks. The whisperer in the north wing, its attention scattered and hungry. The cold concentration in the east wing that pulled thermal energy from everything nearby. Dozens more throughout the building, some nearly dormant, some pushing at their edges, testing what had just changed. They all pushed at once, when they felt the transfer complete. The pain redoubled. I bent forward over the book. "Push back," Mike said urgently. "You can feel where they're testing. Focus there. Use the connection." I didn't understand the mechanism, but I understood what he meant, the way you understand how to balance on a bicycle. Not through explanation, but through the feeling of almost failing. I found the pressure points where the boundaries were being tested and pushed back. Not physically, something else. They resisted. Then, gradually, they receded. The pain settled into a dull, constant ache. I straightened up and took my hands off the book. The connection stayed, a persistent awareness at the back of my mind, like a sound you stop noticing, but that's always there. "Good," Mike said. He sounded exhausted and lighter at the same time. "The immediate breach points are stable. The rest takes practice." We climbed back to the main floor. I moved through the warehouse differently now. I could feel the entities tracking our path from their sections, could feel the tall figure following at a distance behind us, staying just outside the doorways it couldn't pass through. "The night shift can come back tomorrow," Mike said. "The immediate crisis is past." He glanced at me. "You'll need to be here most of the time at first, while you're calibrating." "I know." "There's a living space in the administrative wing. Previous keepers have used it." I nodded. The reality of it was settling in. Not as panic, which surprised me, more as a kind of clarity. The decision was made. The path ahead was what it was. "I'll need to handle my apartment," I said. "A few things. That can be managed. You have 12 hours. He paused. "Dan." He stopped walking. "I know this wasn't what you came here for. I am sorry for that. Genuinely." I looked at him. 15 years. He'd done this for 15 years. "Go home, Mike," I said. Something changed in his face. He nodded once, turned, and walked toward the exit. I stood in the middle of the warehouse floor, listening to his footsteps fade. I could feel him moving farther away, feel the gentle relaxation of the connection on his end as the distance grew. And then he was outside, and the connection released from him entirely. He was free. I turned and looked down aisle 12. The tall figure was there, at the far end, standing completely still. I didn't look away. 1 week later, I stood at the window of what had been Mike's office, watching a young woman cross the parking lot toward the employee entrance. She walked quickly, holding her bag against her side. She had the look of someone trying to appear more confident than they felt. The 7 days since the transfer had been the most disorienting of my life. Mike had spent every hour of them teaching me the entities individually, their histories, their patterns, the specific rituals that maintained each containment point. I learned to keep the awareness running in the background while functioning normally. The way you learn to monitor your balance without thinking about it. Mike had driven away yesterday morning. I'd felt the distance grow in real time, felt the moment he passed the 12-hour boundary, and nothing pulled him back. No pain, clean separation. The new hire's name was Jessica Moreau. She was starting in receiving. I felt the tall figure in aisle 12 register her arrival, a sharpening of attention. I pushed back gently, and it settled. The whisperer in the north wing stirred, as it always did when someone new came into the building. I picked up the folder with Jessica's paperwork and walked to the employee entrance. She looked up when I opened the door. dark hair, practical clothes, the carefully composed expression of someone on a first day. "Jessica," I said. "I'm Dan Reeves, warehouse manager. Good to have you with us." "Thank you." She adjusted her bag. "I'm a little nervous. First warehouse position?" "That's fine. We'll get you up to speed." I led her toward the office, running through the standard orientation the way I'd been trained to run through it. Inventory systems, shipping procedures, break schedules. The normal surface of the job that covered everything underneath. When she finished the paperwork, I took her on the tour. The break room, the locker area, the main floor with its shelving rows and yellow directional lines, and the particular quality of light that came from hundreds of fluorescent tubes in a high-ceilinged space. I kept part of my attention on the entities as we walked, feeling them track our movement, holding them back from the boundaries with the part of my mind that had been remapped in the basement ritual. Jessica noticed nothing unusual. Most people wouldn't. When we returned to the office, I placed the typed sheet on the desk between us. Facility procedures. All staff required. I let my expression settle into something serious. "These aren't suggestions," I said. "Every person who works here agrees to follow them." Jessica picked up the paper and began reading. I watched her face carefully as her eyes moved down the list. Most new hires registered the rules as strange, but ultimately corporate. Liability language dressed up in unusual phrasing. They signed off and got to work, and never understood what the rules were actually for. But some people reacted differently. When Jessica's eyes reached Rule 8, they stopped. She read it again. Then she looked up at me with an expression I recognized. Not fear yet, but the beginning of something that would become fear once it had context. She had seen something, or almost seen something. Even in the reception area, even in the break room, something at the edge of her perception had registered. I held her gaze and said nothing. She looked back down at the list. Her eyes moved to Rule 3. She read it twice. I thought of Mike's face on my first day, watching my reaction to the same page. I thought of what Carol had said. The connection needs to be accepted willingly. It has to be their choice. Jessica set the paper down on the desk. She looked at me steadily. "These are real," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the office window, I could feel the warehouse settling, the entities running their usual patterns, the boundaries holding, the slow rhythms of a contained system. The tall figure in aisle 12 had gone still. "Okay," Jessica said finally. She picked up the pen. "I'll follow them." I watched her sign her name at the bottom of the page, and I thought, not yet. You don't understand what you just walked into, but you will. I thought of a parking lot in Baton Rouge, and a man with salt and pepper hair handing me a sheet of paper with 10 rules on it. Some things repeat. That's how they survive. "Good," I said, and smiled the smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Let's get you started."